Welcome to part two. We're going to talk about the beginning parliamentary procedure CDE for this year and how it's going to work for our 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. Those sorts of rules haven't changed in terms of who's a beginner or anything like that. We're just looking at now with this format activity where one team's competing at a time using the national format of conduct of chapter meeting, what that's going to look like for us. So a couple key things here, because we're using the rules from this. In that proposal that was adopted, talked about in video one, the key thing here is that one way it's changed is there will be no test. So your students are just doing the demonstration, which involves a few key components, and then that's it. They're asked a question at the end, and they're done. We'll talk about that scores here in a moment. But the premise is that your beginning students are serving the capacity of 6 chapter officers and a student advisor. And after opening ceremonies is concluded, a student advisor becomes a member of it's just a student and debates and participates as a student normally would in a meeting. So they're going to demonstrate opening and closing ceremonies, and they're also expected to know the basic job descriptions of their office as outlined in the FFA manual. So that's a good tie-in back to FFA knowledge too, and each of those just has a few bullet points that goes with it, so pretty straightforward when it comes to that. So students are going to do the opening ceremonies. They're going to do the team parliamentary demonstration, as talked about in video one with the card and going through all those motions, debating and all of that. They'll do closing ceremonies, and they're asked a question at the end. And that's the event right there. So very accessible for our 7th and 8th and 9th graders as we put that together. We're doing 7 students for this instead of 6 because we have that advisor position, and that would be probably one change from our beginning competition. So here's a good example of the format here, and the layout's actually called for in the CD manual. And if in person, virtual setting, that'll be a little bit different. But we have our chairperson, we have 3 people on either side, we've got the station markers. There's a time clock so you can see time and how that's going, so they should be able to do that. They have a 13-minute limit on this one to do opening ceremonies, have this session with the main motion and working it through, concluding that and going to closing ceremonies. And this is from the National Finals Hall at National FFA Convention, and that person looks really excited to be here. I'll tell you what. So again, premise, they're going to get that card. They'll have a minute to do it. 4 of your members of the 6 are going to be designated to make a motion on the card. 2 students on the floor won't. They'll just debate. They don't know, again, who has which. They just know which one they've been assigned to. And they know overall the 4 motions are going to be made, so they know that the order they have to go in. All 6 members for full points will need to debate at least 3 times. They can debate actually more than 3 times, but they will only be scored on their best 3 that's there. Another important thing to point out in Robert's Rules of Order is that a student can only debate twice on any one motion before they're done. And that's something it doesn't often come up when we're doing our competition, just the format of ways ours goes, but that definitely could come up in this one. So if they were to debate 3 times on the main motion, that 3rd one would actually be out of order and shouldn't be allowed. So either the chair should call out or the judges shouldn't score it. Here's an example of those cards. Again, these are from Conduct of Chapter Meeting, which is exactly what ours will look like. This would be an example. The main motion is, I move that our chapter require that members wear FFA jackets to all regular meetings. So one student is going to make that main motion. Doesn't matter who. One of them will. And then your students start debating it. And then these other motions come up as appropriate throughout the session here. And everyone knows exactly what those motions are supposed to be. Again, they just don't know who's actually going to be making them unless they or themselves were assigned one. This video is here again. It's straight from the first one. It starts right at the end of opening ceremonies and jumps right into the session here. So I encourage you to watch that and show your students that. And again, this is the ultimate. This is like the polished group of kids who have been doing this for a year probably at this point or close to it, and are really have this down as it goes. Again, here's the allowed motions for the beginning parliamentary procedure for this year. It's actually shorter than our normal list. And then the big difference is that recess has been added to it. We didn't have that before in our competition because it just didn't fit. So that's one to include in your teaching. This card goes with that video you just watched here. So you can get an idea of who had what on here, and you can see how they worked through that whole piece before it was done. So again, our beginning students will need to know the basic hierarchy of motions, so the order they're supposed to go in. They'll need to know how to state those motions. They need to be able to think and debate on their feet. They'll need basic FFA knowledge in order to discuss these topics. And they'll need to know their individual officer duties because their question could be assigned to that. You can see past examples of questions from National FFA. There's lots of good examples there. And you'll see they're very accessible. If kids are engaged in doing this, most of the time they'll know what they're talking about here. Because that question will either be about their officer duties or it'll be about parliamentary procedure in general. Again, appropriate to this grade level. Let's take a look at scores. This comes from the National FFA CD manual, LDE manual, and you'll see this breaking down. The one thing that doesn't account for us, there's no written test for Oregon for 2021. Those were left out, so forget that. Each student's going to get 15 points for their opening ceremony. Each student can earn up to 45 points for their debates. I think each debate's worth 15 points. That's different than the advanced. You'll see that if you're doing both. The president obviously won't receive 45 points worth of debate. Their points are going to be based upon their ability to preside. And you'll see that in a second. 10 points each for their oral question at the end. So their total here is actually going to be 70 points a student because there's no test involved. Down here, you'll see the team was assigned 4 motions. So they'll get up to 200 points for that. Do they reach conclusions? Their team voice, poise, and expression and closing ceremony as a team gets 20 points. So the team total is down here as present and adds up. This is out of 1,000. The difference will be take out 175 points for the test. Let's take a look at the scorecard. So if you're a judge and you're judging this, and this year we'll be judging off the recordings, so the judges won't have to be in there live. It helps eliminate any challenges that might happen. We can see right here, the judge would fill us out. Here's their opening ceremony score right along here. Here's the debate scores. And again, there's 3 boxes because they get to be 3 times. And the president's score on the ability to preside, just 1 score here. Their oral question score points are here. We subtotal it. Notes of who makes which motion and how many points they get out of that. You can also make comments on this one. And then their conclusions. Was the main motion thoroughly analyzed? Conclusions reached were consistent with debate on the motion as was voting. So if all your students voted or were arguing in favor of it, did they actually vote in favor of it, or did they all fail it? One of the things a regular contest doesn't always match up. Closing ceremonies, again, and then any deductions. So parliamentary errors, and there's some pieces in the CD manual to help with that. So that's what that scorecard would look like. 1 place for that 1 round. Team gets a total score. That gets compared to the other teams after they're done. You can see this example set of cards again. This was for CCM. Use this right in class. It's just a Google Doc. And when you go to it, you can see that they can choose which office they are, and then they see their card, and they know which one they were assigned. So that's just also a teaching tool you might think about. And if people make more of these, we could share them. That'd be helpful. So again, as you approach this with your 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, it's always been a challenge to get beginning parliamentary procedure teams. And often the biggest challenge has been the topics. Well, there's no topics to learn anymore. It's just parliamentary procedure and the ability to think. But we also can't just have a previous question kit. We have to have, everybody's got to be able to make every motion. And it can be basic, and they can make mistakes. It's totally fine. Again, the whole point is to learn and to do this. And so we'll be okay. Flawlessness will not be necessary in order to be successful in this. It's just that basic understanding, knowing how your motions are supposed to be made, and being able to do them. So teach those motions, practice efficient, effective debating, use the example cards, and then practice opening and closing ceremonies. That's what you do for conduct of chapter meeting. Here's some resource links again, specific to this competition, as opposed in the first set, had all of them. If there's questions, please reach out to other advisors. Let's work on this together as we do our best to get our kids prepared, and let's see how many kids we actually can be prepared to go out and be able to engage in civic meetings, in our chapter meetings, and all those pieces, and know how to handle themselves with parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order.